Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard.
Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on this podcast. On this podcast, we have new guests and we have returning guests. And this individual has spoken on our podcast before. We liked it the first time around, and we trust it will be awesome this time around. It's also about a topic that we love to talk about in this podcast, election reform, specifically ranked choice voting. So the individual, his name is Jon Ralston, and he's going to tell us what organization he represents specifically in a second. So welcome to the podcast, Jon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back. So I'll just go ahead and start in and hit the ground running since I've been with you guys before.
All right.
My name is Jon Ralston. I'm a volunteer with an organization called Voter Choice Arizona. I live in Tucson, Arizona. I'm about 49 years old. Just a little brief background on myself. I live here in Tucson, Arizona. I lived here for about 24 years, born and raised in Southern California. I'm a massage therapist by trade, but I'm soon completing, having gone back to school to become an acupuncturist. I'm soon going to graduate, probably in August for that. But I've been a proponent of ranked choice voting since the year 2000. My personal politics is that I'm a Green Party member, not terribly active, but I do support the Green Party, and I really became politically active and engaged and aware after the 2000 presidential election, where I supported Ralph Nader, consumer activist who ran for the Green Party, and he has kind of become the prototypical example of what's known as vote splitting, or the spoiler effect, which ranked choice voting is meant to help address. So in case people in the audience aren't familiar with ranked choice voting, we kind of have to compare that to our current voting system. And with our current voting system, it has different names like first past the post, or plurality, or pick one. And for our conversation today, I'll just kind of refer to it as our current voting system. And our current voting system works to the extent that it does when there are only two candidates. You show up, you get your ballot, you pick one, somebody wins with majorities, somebody loses, God bless America. However, there are problems with our current voting system when there are more than two candidates on the ballot. It creates something known as vote splitting, which means because our current voting system is essentially a winner-take-all binary system, if there are multiple candidates, basically the candidates on one side of the aisle of a left-right kind of dynamic, they will split the vote, and that will paradoxically help the other side. So in the case of Ralph Nader in 2000, he's on the left, and he split the vote on the left between himself and Al Gore, and that paradoxically helped elect George W. Bush. And ranked choice voting is a simple upgrade to the way that we vote. Instead of just picking one candidate, you rank candidates in your order of preference: first favorite, second favorite, third favorite, and so forth. And the reason we do that is it allows more people to run, allows people to authentically vote for the candidate that represents them best, and then it has what's called an instant runoff mechanism that mitigates this vote splitting and the spoiler issue. So with all that said, our organization, Voter Choice Arizona, is working to implement ranked choice voting in Arizona. We're going to kind of combine it with a couple other reforms, but that's it in a nutshell.
Great. And we interviewed you a couple years ago, and we talked in detail about these topics. So I plan to, if possible, put this into the show notes, the URL of the first episode, so people can look for it.
Perfect.
So, Jon, what has happened both in your organization and in the ranked choice voting movement as a whole since the last time we spoke?
Yes, it's been, we talked probably about 2 years ago. And a lot has happened since then, both here in Arizona and nationally in terms of voting reform and ranked choice voting specifically. When last we talked, our organization was focusing on trying to implement ranked choice voting at the city municipal level.
Okay.
Just to review, there are a couple of ways ranked choice voting, at least in Arizona, can be implemented. It can be implemented at the city level. by what are known as charter cities, cities that were incorporated before Arizona became a state, and they have a certain amount of home rule. And then at the state level through the legislature or with a statewide ballot initiative. And we were pursuing a city initiative process. However, basically the Arizona legislature, which is just slightly dominated or slightly a majority by Republicans, and at the time we had a Republican governor as well, they basically intimidated the cities that we were talking to into not supporting ranked choice voting, not explicitly intimidating them. However, the cities didn't want to pursue it because there would be essentially too much of a fight and too much of a hassle to try and implement ranked choice voting on the city level. And then essentially what's known as the Freedom Caucus, or basically the America First wing of the Republican Party in the state legislature, is very against ranked choice voting here in Arizona, and they have tried to ban it several times. They actually passed a ban that was last session that was vetoed by our now Democratic governor, but they have bypassed the legislature in that the Arizona legislature can directly put ballot initiatives on the ballot without having to go do like the citizen process where citizens actually have to go out and gather signatures and things like that. With a simple majority vote for a certain type of bill, they can just automatically advance an initiative to the ballot here in Arizona. And they have already put an initiative to ban ranked choice voting to be used in primaries on the ballot. That will be on the ballot in 2024 here in Arizona. And then they're working to also advance an initiative to ban ranked choice voting in the general election here in Arizona. So that wing of the Republican Party is very against ranked choice voting. It's important for the audience to understand that ranked choice voting is nonpartisan.
Sure.
The opposition to ranked choice voting is bipartisan, and the support for ranked choice voting is actually bipartisan. Our organization is nonpartisan. We have people from all over the state, from all over the political spectrum. We have Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Greens, Libertarians, Forward Party. We have activists from the American Solidarity Party, all across the spectrum. However, people who have benefited from our current system, from whether they are Democrats or Republicans, they tend to oppose ranked choice voting because it is a change to the system, and it actually broadens the candidate field as well as the issues and solutions that are put on the table in terms of campaigns and elections. So one of the interesting things we're dealing with is just trying to communicate with fellow Arizonans to have them view themselves as Arizonans first, as citizens first, and as, tribal party members second, because that tribalism and that fear of, hey, if we make this change, that might empower, the other tribe to win. That's a predominant underlying issue that we have to overcome. And once we do overcome that, once people do kind of view themselves as citizens first and as party members second, they see the value of ranked choice voting. They see that it allows them to have what we call more voice and more choice, and it's an easier sell. But we're in the process of overcoming that.
Okay, wow, that's a lot of stuff. I've not heard of that America's First caucus. From what I understand, the terminology America's First, that's usually not something that we'd want to support because it's more, I could be wrong about them in particular, but usually it's the people who are anti-immigrant and xenophobic. Is that the type of
essentially,
caucus they are?
Yeah, the actual caucus is called the Freedom Caucus.
Okay.
But and America First is essentially how the kind of Trump base Make America Great Again group refer to themselves. They refer to themselves as America First Conservative.
Okay.
So that's the terminology that I used.
Okay. Sounds good. So what are their contentions with ranked choice voting? What is their, I imagine often in this case they have one reason that they believe in, but they might state another reason publicly why they oppose it. So can you speak to that? What publicly are they using to oppose it?
The underlying reason is that what I just stated. They just don't want they're used to competing and winning in a certain way, and they don't want that challenge by changing the voting system. But they come up, ostensibly in terms of their front-facing messaging. They'll say it's complicated. They will kind of nitpick the process and really harp on something called exhausted ballots. They'll say that it's unconstitutional, that it violates one person, one vote. They will say that it's not fair, that it somehow gives voters more than one vote. They'll assert that it delays results. They'll say that it's a communist plot by socialists.
Oh my.
They'll say that it's a system that they'll compare it to the top two type of open primary system that's used in California and Washington, and assert don't California my Arizona kind of thing, to try and play on people's biases maybe against California or the coastal elites or what have you. They'll assert that it somehow disenfranchises voters, particularly people of color and poor people. They will assert that it creates milquetoast candidates that don't take a stand and just try and go along to get along, and then they'll assert that it's unverifiable and that it promotes fraud. All of those things are demonstrably false. However, as advocates for ranked choice voting, you kind of get thrown off on a tangent trying to knock all these false allegations down, when the fact of the matter is they just don't like it because it changes the way things work and it empowers people to make choices that represent the individual voter better. And if you really dig down deeper, in my personal opinion, they just don't want people to have choices. They want to have kind of gatekeeping control over the choices that appear on people's ballots, and then use the kind of vote splitting scenario, the spoiler effect, to scare people into voting against people rather than voting for people. Sure.
It sounds like they're finding anything they possibly can and trying to make it stick to oppose ranked choice voting.
Correct. They're just throwing a lot of stuff against the wall just to create a general sense of, I don't know, I don't like this, I'm not going to support it. Unfortunately, a large part of what we have to do as an organization is educating
Sure.
the population about the problems of our current voting system, and in our opinion, the 2024, in particular, the presidential election, but even probably our Senate election, will provide opportunities for us to properly educate about that, because we're going to have, at least for the presidential election, at least 5 candidates on Arizona's presidential ballot that are, candidates that are going to get a couple percent of vote. And in elections, statewide elections here in Arizona have been extremely competitive and tight. And again, this is going to provide an opportunity where there's going to be vote splitting. Somebody's going to probably win the state of Arizona in terms of the electoral college with less than 50% of the vote. And then there's going to be all kinds of, gnashing of teeth and, trying to convince candidates to drop out, or shaming voters from voting for the candidate that represents them best because of this vote splitting spoiler effect. So that provides us a great opportunity to educate, but unfortunately, as they say, if you're explaining, you're losing. So there's a dynamic where we have to educate the population, but then again, the rhetorical advantage is for those who are against it, because you just need to convince people to say no, or to say I don't like it, kind of thing. So that's where we are. We just have to take advantage of basically the flaws of our current voting system, We need to highlight the fact that voters want choices. There's consistent polling nationally, at least over the last 6 years, that voters want, quote unquote, a third party. Obviously this is right up the alley of this audience, being for alternative parties. And upwards of 62%, I think, was the last poll that showed that. However, people want choices. They want more parties. They want more candidates. However, our current voting system effectively disincentivizes people from having choices because of the structure of the way that we vote. So that dichotomy is something that we have to bring to the voters' attention and provide ranked choice voting as our solution for that.
Perfect. We were talking about how that America's First Caucus is against ranked choice voting. We also talked about earlier in the show that you have a bipartisan and nonpartisan support. And we've also had people who are affiliated with various reform organizations who are Republican and Democrat who do want reforms even though they're part of the two parties. So given that, what would you say that their motivation, their reason for the reforms, for supporting the reforms like ranked choice voting are?
Basically, the Republicans that we have supporting us tend to be a little bit more right of center, moderate business types. And what they've seen with the rise of the MAGA America First type conservatives that have taken over at least the Republican Party here in Arizona is that those right of center business type Republicans have had more difficulty competing within the Republican Party, coming out of the primary and being able to compete and win in the general election. So, they see ranked choice voting as an opportunity for, their candidates to compete on a level playing field and not lose or not necessarily be weeded out in the primary. And basically the base of the Democratic Party is with us because they're a little bit frustrated by kind of the gatekeeping function that the party exerts on who runs and, kind of single-shotting candidates and discouraging other candidates from competing in the primary. So the base of the Democratic Party is with us to try and get more of their base type candidates to be able to compete fairly and let the voters decide. So it's this interesting paradox where the moderate part of the Republican Party supports us, and the more liberal grassroots part of the Democratic Party supports us. And conversely, the more conservative grassroots part of the Republican Party opposes us, and the more moderate part of the Democratic Party they haven't come out explicitly and opposed us, but they've been very coy in terms of whether they will support us or not. So there's there's this weird dynamic. And basically, we have, if just based on national polling and our own internal polling, there's a supermajority that actually supports ranked choice voting once they understand it. However, there's a difference between people who quote unquote support ranked choice voting and people who support ranked choice voting. People who will actually, volunteer or donate their money or advocate for it. So we're in the process of turning quote unquote supporters into supporters that move this from a would like to have reform to a need to have reform. And once we get people to understand that it's a need to have reform, then we're gonna steamroll this thing and we'll get it implemented. But it's a process, and we're doing the work every day, and just showing up and doing the work, and we'll get there.
Sounds good. So you're mentioning a big part of your advocacy work is educating. What does that look like specifically? What types of education do you do? What are the formats? What are the structures of it? What's it look like?
We do anything and everything to try and talk to as many people as possible about ranked choice voting. So We will go out and stand on street corners at farmers markets, at street fairs with a little A-frame sign saying, hey, ask me about ranked choice voting, and we give what we call our 30-second pitch. We, put out messaging on social media. We talk to groups, whether those are kind of interest groups or civic groups or even what are referred to as legislative districts or LDs. So within the state legislature, it has a legislative district. So like the parties, particularly the Democrat and Republican parties, have more formalized legislative districts, and there are essentially groups within the legislative district of those parties, and we go out and we speak to those legislative district groups. To be perfectly honest, we've only spoken to Democratic legislative district groups because the Republican Party has been so vehemently against ranked choice voting, so we haven't actually gotten an opportunity to speak directly to Republicans, but we do tend to, in a roundabout way, speak to Republicans and conservatives through other groups. So we basically we do public presentations, we host happy hours, basically if we can find a way to get in front of at least one person talk about ranked choice voting, we do it.
Great.
And again, once people hear about it and understand it, then they tend to like it and they tend to support it, and that's how things kind of grow.
Sure. Today we're talking for a little while, and you mentioned a 30-second pitch. Would you care to share that with our audience? We'd love to hear exactly what that entails, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. I kind of incorporated it at the beginning, but basically says, ranked choice voting is a simple upgrade to the way that we vote. Instead of just picking one candidate, you rank candidates in your order of preference: first favorite, second favorite, third favorite, so forth. So why would we do that? Because if there are more than two candidates in an election, there's something called vote splitting, or the spoiler effect, where if you vote for the candidate that you love instead of the candidate that you like or can tolerate, you can paradoxically elect the candidate that you don't like. Ranked choice voting mitigates that, allows you to vote for whoever represents you best. And then if the candidate that you love can't win, then you have backup choices. And we're Voter Choice Arizona. We're working to bring this here to Arizona. And we're out identifying supporters, educating the public, and we're trying to work towards implementing this here in Arizona. And that's basically the pitch. I usually have a clipboard with a couple of laminated pictures of basically, like I mentioned, that 2000 presidential election example with George W. Bush, Al Gore, and Ralph Nader. So I show that to them, and then I will point out that this is not partisan, this is a structural issue. And then I also have an example of the 1992 presidential election where Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Ross Perot had a vote splitting scenario to show that the vote splitting is a structural issue. It's not a partisan issue. It cuts both ways. And then I have a third example where I list several candidates that will likely be on the ballot here in Arizona for president. So Trump, Biden, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, Jill Stein. I picked Chase Oliver as who I think will probably be the likely libertarian candidate, and then I threw in Joe Manchin as a potential no labels party candidate. So I said, and I say, basically there's an example where the vote splitting goes against the left. That's the Al Gore example. There's an example where the vote splitting goes against the right. That's the Ross Perot example. And there's going to be another example in 2024 with our presidential election. So with that pitch, with those visuals, people understand the problem. They see how it can work to allow them to vote for whoever represents them best, and then that's usually where we get people to kind of sign on the dotted line and become a supporter and give us their email and continue to build momentum. Sounds
good. So I take it you would recommend that people in advocacy work, whatever organization they're from, they have something similar to your 30-second pitch?
Yeah, just in general, it's always good to have an elevator pitch about what you do, whether you're, in advocacy or business or whatever, just so you're at a cocktail party or at the park or whatever, people can have an idea of what you do, why it's important, and, an invitation for them to join you.
Sure. Perfect. That sounds good. That sounds good advice, and I work on that type of stuff myself, so I see the value in that.
Sure.
Jon, what can our listeners do to support your organization and its efforts?
Our website is voterchoicearizona.org.
Okay.
That's our 501c3. That's the organization that I mainly volunteer for. And as a 501c3, that's like a tax. I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Like a tax ID kind of situation. That means that it can only be educational, not advocacy. So if people want to go to Voter Choice Arizona and make some donations, if there are Arizonans that are listening to this, they want to volunteer, we'd love to have you. Basically, there's only one skill we need from people, and that is the ability to show up. Otherwise,
Wow.
we can teach them whatever else we need them to do. Everybody has value. Everybody has skills. Everybody has a circle of influence. If Arizonans want to use their value, skills, and influence to help improve our elections and make our society better, we will find a way to put them to work. We have formed what's known as a 501c4, which is another kind of tax status designation for an organization that can do advocacy, that can move forward with like a campaign that's called Better Ballot Arizona.
Okay.
And that organization also could use funding. We were working towards a statewide initiative for 2024, but unfortunately that didn't materialize.
Okay.
However, we're working towards 2026 at the earliest to try and do a statewide initiative. So if people want to donate towards that would be awesome. And just spread the word. If you support ranked choice voting and you're here in Arizona, please join our organization. If you are elsewhere, a lot of states, can't say every state, but a lot of states have grassroots organizations like Voter Choice Arizona that are working towards ranked choice voting. You can go to kind of an umbrella organization called Rank the Vote, and you can find an organization in your state that is working towards ranked choice voting, and join the cause.
Perfect. Jon, we like what you're doing at your organization. We love what you're doing at your organization, so we trust you'll keep it going and keep making progress and keep advancing the cause.
Absolutely.
All right, we wish your organization all the best, and also we wish you all the best in your personal and professional life, all your endeavors that you do in life.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You all have a great day.
All right, take care and all the best.
All right. Bye.